The medical bay of Station Kepler 7 hummed with the quiet efficiency that Dr. Elena Vasquez had come to love over her 3 years stationed there. The soft blue glow of the healing pods cast gentle shadows across the pristine white walls, while the steady beep of monitors created a rhythm that soothed both patients and staff alike. Elena moved between the beds with practiced grace, her dark hair pulled back in a neat bun, her hands steady as she checked vitals and administered medications. "How are we feeling today, Ambassador Crix?" she asked the Zephyrian diplomat lying in bed 7, her voice warm despite the universal translator's mechanical tone. The insectoid being's compound eyes focused on her with what she had learned to recognize as gratitude. "Much improved, Dr. Vasquez," Crix replied, his mandibles clicking softly. "Your treatments have been most effective. My thorax pain has diminished considerably." Elena smiled, making notes on her tablet. She had always believed that healing knew no species boundaries. Whether treating humans, Zephyrians, Voltani, or any of the dozens of other alien races that frequented this neutral station, her approach remained the same. Treat every patient with dignity, compassion, and the best medical care possible. The station served as a crucial diplomatic hub in this sector of space, where representatives from various civilizations gathered to conduct trade negotiations, settle disputes, and maintain the delicate peace that had existed for the past decade. Elena took pride in being part of that mission, even in her small way. Her medical bay was neutral territory, a place where even sworn enemies could receive care without fear. "Doctor," called nurse practitioner Yara from across the room, "we have the Corvani delegation coming in for their routine health screenings this afternoon. I've prepared Bay 3, as you requested." Elena nodded, finishing her notes. The Corvani were a warrior species, tall and muscular with gray skin marked by intricate tattoos that told the story of their battles. They were honorable in their own way, but their culture valued strength above all else. Some of them struggled to understand why humans would dedicate their lives to healing rather than conquest. As if summoned by her thoughts, the medical bay doors hissed open, and 3 Corvani warriors strode in. Their leader, General Thakvar, stood nearly 7 feet tall. His scarred arms crossed over his broad chest. Behind him followed 2 subordinates, their faces set in expressions of barely concealed disdain. "Human," Thakvar rumbled, his voice like grinding stone. "We are here for the required medical examination." "Of course, General," Elena replied professionally, gesturing toward the examination area. "If you'll follow me, we can begin immediately." The examination proceeded routinely at first. Elena conducted the standard scans, checking for diseases or conditions that might pose a risk to other station inhabitants. The Corvani submitted to the process with military discipline, though she could sense their impatience. It was during the blood work that things began to go wrong. "Your iron levels are slightly elevated," Elena mentioned casually to one of the subordinates, a warrior named Graktol. "Nothing dangerous, but I'd recommend reducing your intake of fermented kelp. It can cause—" "Silence," Graktol snarled, his hand moving instinctively to where his weapon would normally rest. "I do not take orders from weak prey species." The tension in the room spiked immediately. Elena stepped back, her hands raised peacefully. "I'm sorry if I overstepped. I was only making a medical suggestion for your health." General Takvar's eyes narrowed as he studied her. "You humans fascinate me," he said slowly. "Your species conquered half the galaxy, defeated armies that had never known defeat. And yet here you stand, dedicating your life to preserving others rather than taking them." Elena felt a chill run down her spine at the predatory tone in his voice, but she maintained her composure. "Medicine is how I serve. Everyone deserves care and healing." "Serve," Takvar repeated, tasting the word. "Yes, that is what your kind does now, isn't it? You serve others, having forgotten the strength that made you dominant." He stepped closer, looming over her. "Tell me, little healer, what do you know of humanity's war machine?" "I know enough," Elena replied quietly. "I know that war brought suffering, and that's why I chose a different path." The general laughed, a harsh sound that made the other patients in the medical bay shift nervously. "A different path? How?" Noble. His expression suddenly darkened. And how foolish. Before Elena could react, Graktol moved with startling speed. His massive hand struck her across the face, sending her stumbling backward into a medical cart. Instruments scattered across the floor as she fell, her tablet clattering away. Graktol! Thakvar barked. But there was no real anger in his voice, only mild annoyance at his subordinate's lack of discipline. Elena touched her cheek where blood trickled from a cut made by Graktol's ring. Around the medical bay, other patients began to stir, some calling out in alarm. Nurse Yara rushed forward, helping Elena to her feet. "Are you injured, doctor?" Yara asked urgently, her hands shaking as she examined Elena's face. "I'm fine," Elena said, though her voice was unsteady. She looked directly at General Thakvar. "Violence in the medical bay is strictly forbidden by station regulations. I'll have to report this incident to Security Chief Morrison." Thakvar's lips curled in what might have been a smile. "Report it, then. Tell them that a Corvani warrior struck a human healer. Tell them that your precious neutrality means nothing when faced with true strength." He leaned down until his face was inches from hers. "Your kind grows soft, little healer. You've forgotten what you are." The three Corvani warriors left without another word, their heavy footsteps echoing in the suddenly silent medical bay. Elena stood frozen for a moment, her hand still pressed to her bleeding cheek, processing what had just happened. "Dr. Vasquez," Ambassador Crick said quietly from his bed, his compound eyes reflecting concern. "Are you certain you're unharmed?" That was unprecedented. Elena nodded, accepting a clean cloth from Yara to dab at her cut. "I'm okay. These things happen sometimes in medicine. Not everyone appreciates what we do." But even as she spoke the words, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was different. There had been something in Thakvar's eyes, something that went beyond simple disrespect for medical personnel. It was as if he had been testing her, or testing something about humanity itself. "Should I contact your husband?" Yara asked quietly, knowing that Elena's husband worked elsewhere on the station, but not knowing exactly what his job entailed. Elena shook her head quickly. "No. There's no need to worry him over something like this. It's just a scratch." She straightened her coat and picked up her fallen tablet. "Let's get back to work. Our patients need us." But as the day wore on, Elena found herself repeatedly touching the cut on her cheek, unable to forget the way Thakvar had looked at her when he spoke about humanity's forgotten strength. She had no idea that her assault had been witnessed by more than just the patients in the medical bay. Security cameras had recorded everything. And within hours, the footage would find its way to someone who had spent years trying to leave his past behind. Someone who had thought he could build a new life dedicated to peace and healing through his wife's example. Someone who, upon seeing his beloved Elena struck and threatened, would remember exactly why the galaxy had once feared the mention of humanity's warriors. Elena finished her shift that evening with no idea that her world was about to change forever. She treated her patients with the same care and compassion she always had, bandaged her cut, and prepared to go home to the quiet life she and her husband had built together. She didn't know that across the station, in a small maintenance bay that officially didn't exist, someone was cleaning weapons that hadn't been touched in 5 years. She didn't know that the universe was about to remember why humanity had earned its reputation as the galaxy's most dangerous species. All she knew was that she was tired, her face hurt, and she wanted nothing more than to go home to the man who made her feel safe in a dangerous galaxy. She had no idea that the man waiting for her had once been the most dangerous thing in that galaxy, and that seeing her hurt would awaken something that had been deliberately buried. The first domino had fallen. The Corvani had made their choice when they decided to hurt someone under the protection of a human who had retired from a very particular line of work. They would soon learn that some retirements could be very temporary indeed. Marcus Chen sat in the small apartment he shared with Elena, staring at the security footage on his personal tablet for the 4th time. His hands remained perfectly steady, but anyone who knew how to read the signs would have noticed the way his breathing had changed. The subtle shift in his posture, the deadly stillness that had settled over his features. He was a maintenance worker, according to his official station records. Level 3 Environmental Systems Specialist. He fixed air recyclers, cleaned coolant lines, and made sure the artificial gravity generators stayed calibrated. It was honest work, peaceful work, and it had been exactly what he needed after 15 years of being something else entirely. But as he watched the Corvani warrior's hand strike his wife's face, watched her stumble and fall, watched the blood begin to trickle down her cheek, Marcus remembered why he had been so very good at his previous profession. The apartment door chimed softly, and Elena's voice called out, "I'm home." Marcus quickly closed the tablet and moved to greet her, his face carefully composed into the expression of concern that any loving husband would wear upon seeing his wife's injury. When Elena rounded the corner into their living area, he gasped with perfectly genuine shock at the sight of the bandage on her cheek. "Elena, what happened?" He reached for her gently, his touch feather-light as he examined her face. "It's nothing serious," she said, leaning into his embrace. "Just had a difficult patient today. A Corvani warrior got a bit aggressive during his medical screening." She managed a tired smile. "Occupational hazard, you know?" Marcus held her close, his chin resting on the top of her head, and Elena couldn't see the expression that crossed his features. "Are you okay? Did station security handle it?" "I filed a report with Security Chief Morrison. He said he'd look into it. But you know how these diplomatic situations can be. The Corvani have immunity for minor infractions." Elena pulled back to look at him. "Really, Marcus, I'm fine. It's just a scratch." "Of course," Marcus said, his voice warm and reassuring. "But promise me you'll be extra careful tomorrow? Maybe ask Yara to stay close when you're dealing with the more aggressive species?" Elena nodded, touched by his concern. This was one of the things she loved most about Marcus. How he worried about her without trying to control her. How he supported her work even when it put her in danger. He was so different from the other men she had known before him, men who had tried to convince her to choose safer career paths, or who had resented the time she spent with her patients. Marcus had understood from the beginning that healing was not just her job but her calling. He had never once suggested she should do anything else, never complained when she worked late shifts or brought her concerns home with her. In the 3 years they had been together, 2 of them married, he had been nothing but supportive of her dedication to medicine. What Elena didn't know was that Marcus understood her calling so well because he had once had a calling of his own, a very different one. They spent a quiet evening together, sharing dinner and talking about their days. Elena told him about her patients, about Ambassador Crix's improvement, and the successful surgery she had performed on a Voltani trader's damaged exoskeleton. Marcus listened with genuine interest, asking questions and celebrating her successes with the enthusiasm of someone who truly cared. In return, Marcus told her about his day maintaining the station's environmental systems, spinning mundane tales of routine repairs and system upgrades. He was an excellent storyteller, able to make even the most boring maintenance work sound interesting, and Elena enjoyed hearing about the technical challenges he faced. Neither of them mentioned the Corvani incident again, but after Elena had fallen asleep that night, Marcus slipped quietly out of bed and made his way to a storage compartment that Elena had never thought to examine closely. Hidden behind cleaning supplies and spare filters was a small case that hadn't been opened in 5 years. Inside the case were items that Marcus Chen, environmental systems specialist, had no reason to own. False identification papers with a dozen different names and species classifications. Untraceable credit chips containing enough funds to disappear completely. Communication devices that could reach certain contacts without going through official channels. And at the bottom of the case, wrapped in black cloth, was a single data chip, labeled with a code that had once struck fear into the hearts of warlords and crime bosses across 3 star systems. Marcus held the chip up to the light, remembering the man he used to be. Alexander Cross had been the best assassin in human space, possibly in all known space. He had worked for governments and crime syndicates alike, taking contracts that ranged from removing corrupt politicians to eliminating alien warlords who threatened human colonies. He had been very good at his job. So good that his reputation had eventually become a liability. Everyone wanted to hire Alexander Cross. But everyone also feared him. Governments began to see him as too dangerous to exist independently. Criminal organizations started putting bounties on his head to prevent him from working for their rivals. So Alexander Cross had died in an explosion on a mining station in the Outer Rim, and Marcus Chen had been born from his ashes. Marcus had no combat experience, no military training, no history of violence. He was just a civilian engineer who had fallen in love with a doctor and wanted nothing more than a quiet life. It had been perfect. Elena made him want to be better than he had been, made him believe that he could build something good and clean from the wreckage of his former life. For 5 years, he had been genuinely happy, genuinely peaceful, genuinely reformed. But watching that security footage had awakened something that had only been sleeping, never truly dead. Marcus activated his personal terminal and began to work, his fingers dancing across the keyboard with the muscle memory of someone who had once lived in the shadows. Within an hour, he had accessed files that didn't officially exist, pulled security footage from cameras that weren't supposed to be recording, and traced the movements of the 3 Corvani warriors who had been in Elena's medical bay. General Thakvar was staying in the diplomatic quarters' most expensive suite, his expenses paid by the Corvani government as part of ongoing trade negotiations. He had 2 bodyguards with him at all times, both elite warriors from his personal regiment. His schedule for the next 3 days included meetings with station administrators, trade consortium representatives, and military attachés from several human colonies. Graktol and the other subordinate were housed in standard diplomatic quarters on level 7. Their records showed multiple disciplinary actions for aggressive behavior toward other species, but nothing serious enough to result in diplomatic sanctions. They were scheduled to return to Corvani space in 4 days aboard a military transport. Marcus studied their routines, their security arrangements, their vulnerabilities. He noted which routes they took through the station, where they ate, when they slept, who they interacted with. It was like riding a bicycle. The skills were still there, sharp and ready despite years of disuse. He could kill all 3 of them within 24 hours and make it look like accidents. A malfunction in an airlock, a reaction to contaminated food, a fall down a maintenance shaft. He knew 100 ways to make people disappear without a trace. But that wasn't what Alexander Cross would have done, and it wasn't what Marcus Chen was going to do either. What his wife needed wasn't revenge, it was justice. What the galaxy needed wasn't more death, but a reminder of why humans had earned their reputation as protectors, as well as predators. What the Corvani needed was a lesson about the consequences of hurting someone under human protection. Marcus began to plan something far more sophisticated than simple assassination. He was going to remind the galaxy why humans had become the dominant species, not through mindless violence, but through the intelligent application of overwhelming force when it was necessary. The next morning, Elena woke to find Marcus already dressed and preparing breakfast. Humming softly to himself as he worked, he seemed particularly cheerful, giving her extra attention and asking repeatedly if her face was feeling better. "You seem happy today," Elena observed, accepting the coffee he offered her. "Just grateful," Marcus replied, kissing her forehead gently. "Grateful that you weren't hurt worse. Grateful that we have each other. Grateful for this life we've built." Elena smiled, warmed by his words. "I love you too." "I love you more than you know," Marcus said. And there was something in his voice that made Elena look at him more closely. But his expression was the same as always. Warm, loving, slightly concerned about her injury. She couldn't have known that, as she left for work that morning, the most dangerous man in human space was beginning to prepare for his return to active duty. She couldn't have known that her husband was about to remind the galaxy exactly why humans had earned their fearsome reputation. All she knew was that Marcus had seemed particularly attentive that morning, and that the way he had held her before she left had felt almost like goodbye. The second domino was ready to fall, and when it did, the Corvani were going to learn that some humans never truly retired from the art of war. They just got better at choosing their battles. The first sign that something had changed came during the morning shift change. Security Chief Morrison was reviewing routine reports when his terminal chimed with an urgent message from an encrypted source he hadn't seen in years. The sender was listed only as AC, but Morrison knew exactly who that meant. He had been a military police investigator during humanity's expansion wars, and he had worked with Alexander Cross on 3 separate occasions. Each time, Cross had been hunting someone that the regular military couldn't touch. War criminals hiding behind diplomatic immunity, rogue officers selling weapons to hostile aliens, Corrupt politicians whose deaths needed to look accidental. Morrison had thought Cross was dead. Everyone did. The man had simply vanished 5 years ago, and most people in the intelligence community assumed he had either retired to some hidden colony world or been eliminated by one of his many enemies. The message was brief. Meet me in Storage Bay 47C in 1 hour. Come alone. A. C. Morrison stared at the message for a long moment, his mind racing. Storage Bay 47C was in the maintenance section, accessible only to engineering staff and security personnel. It was also one of the few places on the station that wasn't under constant surveillance, a blind spot that existed purely by accident, but which someone like Cross would have identified immediately. An hour later, Morrison found himself standing in the dimly lit storage bay, surrounded by spare parts and cleaning supplies. He didn't have to wait long. Marcus Chen stepped out of the shadows between 2 storage units, moving with the fluid silence that Morrison remembered from their previous encounters. "Hello, Morrison," Marcus said quietly. "Thank you for coming." "Jesus Christ," Morrison breathed, studying the man before him. "You've been here the whole time, haven't you?" Marcus Chen, Environmental Systems Specialist. "I should have known. You had no reason to suspect." "I've been very careful to be ordinary." Marcus's expression hardened. "But yesterday, someone hurt my wife." Clued. Morrison felt a chill run down his spine. "Your wife? You mean Dr. Vasquez?" "You saw the report." "I saw it, filed it with the diplomatic corps, but you know how these things go. Corvani immunity means my hands are tied unless someone dies." Morrison paused, studying Marcus's face. "Please tell me you're not planning to kill General Thakvar. The diplomatic fallout would be catastrophic." Marcus smiled, and Morrison was reminded why Alexander Cross had been both feared and respected throughout human space. "I'm not going to kill anyone, Morrison. That would be counterproductive." He stepped closer. "But I am going to remind the galaxy why humans don't hurt each other's families. What do you need?" "3 things. First, I need you to understand that whatever happens in the next 48 hours, Dr. Elena Vasquez is to be kept completely out of it. She doesn't know who I used to be, and I want to keep it that way." Morrison nodded. "Done. What else?" "Second, I need you to make sure that when the dust settles, there's a clear record that justice was served. Not revenge, not murder. Justice." Marcus handed him a data chip. "Everything you need to build airtight cases against all 3 Corvani is on there. Evidence of war crimes they committed during the Outer Rim conflicts, violations of galactic peace accords, illegal weapons trafficking." Morrison pocketed the chip. "Where did you get this?" "I have my sources. The point is, these aren't innocent diplomats who got carried away. They're war criminals hiding behind diplomatic status." Marcus's voice hardened. "And third, I need you to make sure that when this is over, the right people hear about it. Not the media, not the general public, but the people who matter. The ones who make decisions about whether to test human resolve." "What exactly are you planning?" Marcus was quiet for a moment, his eyes distant. "Do you remember the Arcturus incident?" Morrison felt his blood run cold. "Cross. That was different. That was war." "No," Marcus said quietly. "That was a demonstration. Just like this will be." The Arcturus incident had become legend in military circles. A hegemony battle fleet had captured a human colony ship carrying civilians, demanding ransom and threatening to execute the hostages if human forces approached. The situation had seemed hopeless. Any rescue attempt would result in massive civilian casualties. Then Alexander Cross had infiltrated the flagship, not to rescue the hostages, but to deliver a message. He had systematically eliminated the command structure of the entire battle fleet, leaving lower-ranking officers to find their superiors dead with notes explaining exactly why they had died. The psychological impact had been so severe that the surviving hegemony forces had not only released all hostages, but had fled human space entirely. The incident had ended a war that could have lasted years and cost millions of lives. "Morrison," Marcus said, his voice gentle now, I spent 15 years being a weapon. Elena showed me how to be something else. But yesterday, someone reminded me that sometimes the greatest service a weapon can perform is to protect those who dedicate their lives to healing others. Morrison was quiet for a long moment. What do you need me to do? Just your job. When the evidence appears, investigate it properly. When the crimes come to light, prosecute them fully. And when people ask what happened to the 3 Corvani warriors who thought they could hurt a human healer without consequences, Marcus smiled again. Tell them the truth. Tell them that humanity protects its own. That evening, General Thakvar was enjoying an expensive dinner in the station's finest restaurant, regaling his subordinates with stories of past conquests. The Corvani had always believed that strength was the only currency that mattered in the galaxy, and humans had grown soft since their expansion wars ended. He had been making this point to various alien dignitaries for weeks, using yesterday's incident in the medical bay as an example. A Corvani warrior had struck a human healer, and what had happened? Nothing. The humans had filed a report, made some diplomatic protests, but taken no real action. It was proof, he argued, that humanity's reputation as the galaxy's apex predators was largely historical. Modern humans were too civilized, too concerned with peace and diplomacy to respond with the kind of devastating force that had once made their enemies tremble. He was midway through describing how humans used to deal with threats to their people when the lights went out. Emergency lighting kicked in a moment later, bathing the restaurant in dim red light. Other diners murmured in confusion, but Thakvar's warrior instincts immediately went to high alert. His hand moved to his ceremonial blade, and he gestured for his subordinates to do the same. Probably just a power fluctuation, Graktol muttered, but his voice carried uncertainty. The lights came back on, and for a moment everything seemed normal. Then Thakvar noticed something that made his blood turn to ice. Lying on his plate, where his dinner had been moments before, was a small data chip and a handwritten note. The note was simple. Some humans never forgot how to hunt. You have 24 hours to turn yourselves in for war crimes, or I will remind the galaxy why we became the dominant species. It was signed with a single initial, C. Thakvar's hands shook as he picked up the chip, his mind racing. Around them, the restaurant continued its normal operations, other diners chatting and laughing, completely unaware that anything unusual had happened. Somehow, someone had managed to infiltrate the most secure dining facility on the station, get close enough to touch his food, and leave without being seen by him or his bodyguards. It should have been impossible. General, Graktol whispered. How did they? Silence, Thakvar hissed, slipping the chip into his pocket. We're leaving. Now. They returned to the general's quarters, where Thakvar immediately swept the room for surveillance devices, before inserting the chip into a secure terminal. What he found there made his knees weak. Detailed records of war crimes he had committed during the Outer Rim conflicts. Video evidence of civilian executions he had ordered. Financial records showing his involvement in illegal weapons trafficking. Personal communications discussing plans to eliminate human colonies that had refused Corvani demands. All of it was real. All of it was documented. And all of it was more than enough to see him executed for crimes against galactic peace. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the final file on the chip. A complete dossier on Alexander Cross, the legendary human assassin who had vanished 5 years ago. The file included a detailed account of his methods, his confirmed kills, and his most famous operations. At the bottom of the file was a recent photograph of Marcus Chen, environmental systems specialist, standing beside Dr. Elena Vasquez, at what appeared to be a station's social function. The message was clear. The galaxy's most dangerous human was alive. He was here. And Thakvar had just made a very personal enemy by hurting someone he loved. Over the next 18 hours, the 3 Corvani warriors experienced a masterclass in psychological warfare. They found evidence of their crimes waiting in their quarters, their belongings, even their private communications. Security footage from their previous war crimes appeared on their personal terminals. Detailed plans of their quarters, complete with every entrance, exit, and hiding place, were slipped under their doors. Most terrifying of all, They began to find small items from their personal effects, moved or missing. Things that should have been impossible for anyone else to access. A ring from Graktol's sealed luggage appeared on his pillow. Thakvar's private ceremonial dagger was found embedded in his quarters wall with a note reading, "I could have chosen anywhere on your body." By the time the 24-hour deadline arrived, all three warriors were hollow-eyed and exhausted, jumping at shadows and seeing threats everywhere. They had tried to leave the station, only to find their transport mysteriously experiencing technical difficulties. They had requested additional security, only to be told that station resources were stretched thin. Marcus Chen had spent the entire period making himself visible in the maintenance areas, cheerfully performing his duties as environmental systems specialist, while dozens of station personnel could verify his whereabouts. It was the perfect alibi. He was clearly just a regular maintenance worker, going about his normal routine, but Alexander Cross was everywhere the Corvani looked. When the deadline passed, General Thakvar did something that no Corvani warrior had done in over 3 centuries. He surrendered. All 3 Corvani warriors presented themselves to Security Chief Morrison, confessed to their war crimes, and requested immediate extradition to face trial in Galactic Court. They provided detailed testimonies, handed over evidence of their crimes, and begged to be placed in protective custody. Morrison, following his instructions, processed their confessions, verified their evidence, and began the formal procedures for war crimes prosecution. It was all completely by the book, all legally sound, all properly documented. When Elena heard the news, she was surprised but pleased that justice had been served. When Marcus came home that evening, she told him about the Corvani confession with obvious satisfaction. "It's amazing," she said. "Apparently they just broke down and confessed to everything. Chief Morrison says they'll spend the rest of their lives in prison." "That's wonderful," Marcus replied, holding her close. "I'm glad justice was done." "Me too. Though I have to admit, I'm a little curious about what made them confess." Morrison seemed really pleased about something, but he wouldn't say what. Marcus smiled, kissing the top of her head. "Maybe they just realized that hurting innocent people was wrong." Elena laughed softly. "Maybe. Or maybe they remembered that humans protect their own." She had no idea how right she was. Within weeks, word of the incident had spread throughout the diplomatic community. The official story was simple. 3 Corvani war criminals had been brought to justice after their crimes were exposed by an anonymous source. But the real story, whispered in back channels and classified briefings, was very different. The galaxy was reminded that humans didn't just forgive and forget when their people were hurt. They were reminded that somewhere out there, guardians watched over human civilians, guardians who possessed skills that made conventional security irrelevant. Most importantly, they were reminded that the human capacity for devastating retaliation hadn't disappeared with the end of the expansion wars. It had simply evolved, become more precise, more psychological, more terrifying in its restraint. Alexander Cross remained officially dead. Marcus Chen continued his work as a maintenance engineer, loving his wife and living his quiet life. But across the galaxy, those who made decisions about testing human resolve had received a very clear message. Elena Vasquez continued her work as a healer, never knowing that her husband's love for her had just reminded the universe why humanity commanded respect throughout the stars. She treated her patients with the same compassion and skill as always, secure in the knowledge that she lived in a civilized galaxy where justice ultimately prevailed. And in the maintenance bays and engineering sections of Station Kepler 7, Marcus Chen went about his duties with the satisfaction of someone who had successfully protected everything that mattered to him. The weapons were cleaned and put away, the false identities secured, the dangerous skills returned to their dormant state, but they would always be there, ready to awaken again if anyone was foolish enough to threaten the gentle soul who had taught him that the greatest strength lay not in taking life, but in the willingness to do whatever it took to protect those who dedicated themselves to preserving it. The galaxy had learned its lesson. Humans were no longer the conquering force they had once been, but they remained the guardians they had always been at heart. And sometimes, being a guardian required reminding predators that even healers had those who watched over them. Elena was safe, justice had been served, and the balance of the universe remained intact. For Marcus Chen, former assassin and current devoted husband, that was all that mattered.